Hello, friends. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Michelle Fondin, and I'm the author of 11 published books, including The Empowered Divine Feminine, Becoming an Unstoppable Woman in the 21st Century and Beyond, and Heal Yourself, A Return to Wholeness, the Integration of Body, Mind, Soul, and Spirit. You can find all of my published books on Amazon. If you're new to my channel, welcome. Thank you for subscribing below. Click on the bell, scroll up to all for all notifications. And thank you for giving the video a thumbs up. I teach meditation. If you're interested in learning a silent meditation practice with your personalized mantra, you can register at the link below. Welcome to my series on exploring your inner world. And this video is on the fourth sign of a spiritual awakening. And this is something that we don't like to talk about. It's the sign that people don't like to say, and they don't like to talk about it. So let's dive deeply into this sign about your spiritual awakening. If you haven't yet viewed the first 3 signs, I'll put the link to the playlist right here so you can view that after this video. So the 4th sign to a spiritual awakening is what I call the funk. The funk, the blues, the funk, the blues, maybe mild depression. Yes, that is the 4th sign that we don't like to talk about. We really don't like to talk about this, and this is not what some people call the dark night of the soul. Not yet, at least. Not at this point in your spiritual awakening. The dark night of the soul, or even ego death, as some people call it. I don't call it ego death. If you really want to know my opinion on the ego, pick up this book. It's a very short read. It's not a super long read, but it's very deep, and it's really going to help you on your spiritual journey. So I don't like the word ego death. That's silly. We have an ego as long as we're living this life, so we can transcend it, but our point is not to crush the ego. That's not the point of a spiritual awakening. But the funk, if you're in a spiritual awakening, you know what I'm talking about. It's the funk, the blues, as I call it, mild depression. The reason I feel this happens, now, of course, hindsight is 20/20. This happened to me, but hindsight is 20/20. When you're going through it, you have no idea that that is what this is and why it's happening. It's really bizarre. So, of course, you're on this spiritual journey. You become awakened to something else. There is something else out there. My life doesn't make sense. People are abandoning me. People are dying on me. You go through this intense phase of educating yourself about the spiritual awakening, about spiritual growth. You find videos, articles, materials, books. You get involved in this. And then you go back into your daily existence and you try to make sense of it all. You go back into your daily life and you're really trying to make sense of what you've learned, what you've been through in the past couple of months, several months maybe, and you're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. You're trying to put what you know and what you've learned and insert it into your life the way it was before. And it's not working. You notice it's not working. People are not listening to you. You might be offering advice or insight or say, look what I just learned. This is super fascinating. Look at how life is. I never looked at life like that before. People are ignoring you. They're not paying attention. They're telling you you're weird. They're changing the subject on you. And they might even say things like, you're going through a midlife crisis. What's wrong with you? Just snap back to the normal person that you were. Come out drinking with us. Go to Margarita Mondays with us. And you're like, no, I just don't want to do that anymore. I don't feel like doing that anymore. You fall into this funk, these blues, and you wake up day after day kind of feeling off, not feeling yourself. And in fact, you're starting to feel more yourself, but since yourself is not fitting into your old life, it feels like you're not yourself. Does that make sense? Did I make sense in that? What I mean is you've learned a new way of thinking. You're learning a new perspective about yourself and the multidimensionality of who you are in this life. And so when you go back to your normal living, which you should, right? You shouldn't ignore your duties and responsibilities. You shouldn't ignore your family, your kids, your job. You should not ignore any of those things. But if you're trying to go back to exactly the way things were with this new knowledge, it's not going to make sense to you. If you try to talk to people about it who aren't ready to hear about living in a very authentic and different way, it's not going to make sense to them either. And they're going to call you weird, and they're going to say you're going through a midlife crisis, even if you're 30. But they're not going to understand in the same way that you understand because they just might not be ready. That's not their path. They're not on the spiritual path yet. And so you go into these blues, you go into this funk, and you think something's wrong with you. And that is why stage 4 happens or sign 4 happens, is because you start to think there's something wrong with me. There must be something wrong with me. I'm getting it wrong. Maybe this was just a big mistake. Maybe I wasn't meant to infuse myself in this spiritual knowledge. Maybe it is weird. Maybe I am weird. And you begin to doubt yourself. You begin to heavily, heavily doubt yourself and wonder if what you are doing is wrong. Now, that is compounded by the fact that you may have been brought up religiously. You may have been brought up by very conventional life standards. And when you go and offer these new agey, they're not really new age, guys. They're like old age, right? That always amused me, right? What people call new age is really based on ancient wisdom, like wisdom that's been around for thousands and thousands of years. If we're talking about like East Indian philosophy or ancient Chinese philosophy or even Buddhism, which is ancient philosophy, they call it new age, which is hilarious to me because it's not new age, it's old age. But when you come forth with these certain aspects of your knowingness, because you've had direct experiences of your awakening to your soul, and you present it to other people and they call you weird and they say you're going off the deep end and they tell you all these things and it makes you feel wrong. I'm wrong. This is wrong. It makes you doubt yourself and your spiritual awakening, and it makes you doubt who you are as a person. And it makes you want to go back to the way things were. It makes you want to go back and forget all about this so-called awakening. And so that makes you depressed. It makes you blue. It makes you in this funk. Nobody likes to talk about this. Some people talk about the dark night of the soul, which is totally different. Dark night of the soul is different. Dark night of the soul is dealing with your demons, your wounds, your core wounds from childhood and past lives. It's not that yet. It's too soon. It's too soon in your spiritual awakening for that to happen because you haven't fully committed to the growth yet, right? You just haven't. You're just kind of dabbling in it. You're dipping your toes in it. You're still learning about what it means to be a human being and a spiritual being in the same body. You're still learning how to move beyond your religious upbringing, which really taught you that spirituality was something outside of yourself. It was something to be followed by rules and regulations. And if you do this, you're good. And if you don't do this, you're not good. So you're learning to move beyond conventions that you've been taught from your past. So really, it has nothing to do with the dark night of the soul or even so much the ego death. The ego might have something to do with it because the ego has a hard time letting go. But really what this is about is you being certain in your own awakening journey, you being certain in this new phase in your life, this new stage in your life where you're discovering that life is bigger. That it's not just these set of paradigms and rules and regulations and this physicalness of who you are, but it's something greater and more expansive and so much more and more magical. Really, that's what this is about. It's embracing the magic and mystery of life. It's about embracing the expansiveness of your life. And when you go back to earth, if you will, when you put your feet on the earth and you start to talk to people, they genuinely will portray to you that something is not right in your head. And that is absolutely the furthest from the truth. I don't know, there might be something wrong with your head, but it might have nothing to do with your spiritual awakening. For the sake of this conversation, we're going to stick to the spiritual awakening. In your spiritual awakening, as you see these signs, as you feel the progression of what you might be moving through, I can sit here and tell you, you are not going crazy, and don't doubt yourself. That if you are going through these stages that I have mentioned in previous videos, if you are awakening to be a better version of yourself, a more authentic version of yourself, and if you are finding that the peace and solace that you seek is inside of you, and you're starting to realize that, then you are getting more sane, not less sane. You are becoming more healthy, more mentally healthy. More sanity is coming to you, not less. And if others around you are not seeing that, it's just because they aren't seeing it. That is it. They're not ready to see it. They're not meant to see it. It's not their time. They're meant to just go along their path. Every single solitary person has a different path and a different timeline, and that is okay. There is absolutely positively nothing wrong with that. So know that if you're feeling the funk, if you're feeling the blues, if you're feeling mildly depressed because you feel like what I know now, what I've researched, what I've learned is not fitting into my current life, that's okay. You still do your current life. Don't abandon your current life. It's never a good idea to abandon what you've built, to abandon your current life while you are still moving through the processes of figuring out who you are. On this next level, right? On this deeper level, on this next level, you wouldn't abandon college halfway through if your goal was to get a degree. That would be pointless. It would be wasted time. If your goal is to get the 4-year degree and you abandon in year 2, why would you do that? You're not there yet. So it's the same way with your spiritual awakening and trying to fit that into your current life and make it fit 100% perfectly. It's not going to happen. So you need to accept for the time being that that is not happening. And then the more you awaken, you can slowly transform and change the things that aren't pleasing to you in your new state of being. You never want to force a change that's not ready to change. You never want to force an ending that's not ready to be ended, right? Because then you create a lot more problems. I have a spiritual teacher from the Chopra Center way back. He's also a Hay House author. His name is David G. He tells his story about when he went through his spiritual awakening, that he really abandoned everything in his life at the time. And he deeply regretted it after. He said, I hurt so many people in my life. And he will say this story. So he tells this story when he was teaching at the Chopra Center events, he would tell that story. And I'm sure he says that story publicly, but he hurt a lot of people. And so he always said when he was teaching us as students not to do the same thing he did and not abandon our lives just because we're going through a spiritual awakening, and to really move through it first. Figure out who you are first. Figure out what you truly want first. If you're feeling the funk, know that it's mostly about you doubting yourself and doubting your spiritual journey and doubting what you've learned up until now. And my advice to you is to stay pretty silent about what you're moving through when it comes to the other people that are close to you. You can just say, oh, I'm reading more material on some spiritual concepts. You don't even have to say that, right? You don't even have to say that. You can just say, I'm going through something right now, but you don't have to say what it is. You have the right to privacy. You have the right to ruminate on what you're moving through before sharing it with others. And you might not even want to share it with others, or you want to be really selective with who you share it with. A lot of times we think in this today's world where everything is instantaneously shared, almost all the time that we have to share, and you absolutely don't have to share. You have the right to have some privacy. You have the right to have some reflection time. You have the right to keep as many things private as you want to keep private. As you're moving through this, keep quiet, especially if you know there are going to be critics out there, such as an ultra-religious parent, for example. If you were raised very religiously and you're talking about higher spiritual self and how God lives inside of us, again, they are going to give you a lot of pushback if they're still ultra-religious. Or for example, with colleagues at work, when it's not appropriate to talk about such topics, but you are so infused in it that you want to talk about your experiences, it just might not be appropriate to talk about those types of things. Or even with a spouse who's not ready to hear about this spiritual journey, and that's okay. A lot of people feel like if my spouse is not on board, then screw them, I'm divorcing them. No. If you're in a long-term marriage, people grow apart, they grow at different levels, they grow back together. Not every marriage or relationship is doomed because one person goes through a spiritual awakening. Sometimes it happens, yes, but other times people work through it. So my advice to you is to stay strong. If you find other spiritual people to talk about with it's a great thing to do with others who are experiencing a spiritual awakening, and just say, hey, are you experiencing this? Is it normal? Is it not normal? That's a good touch point. And you can find people like that typically if you go to crystal shops or spiritual bookshops, or you go to a drum circle or a sound bath meditation or a yoga class even. So sometimes you can just find people who might be going through a spiritual awakening in these types of places where people are more open to it, or even online forums that are specifically designed for such purposes. So I hope this was helpful to you and gave you a little bit of validation if you are experiencing that big funk because of your spiritual awakening. I want to thank you so much for joining me here today. Thank you for subscribing to my channel below. Click on the bell, scroll up to all for all notifications. And thank you for giving the video a thumbs up. Thank you for sharing this with others who might be going through a spiritual awakening. Thank you so much for your support of my YouTube channel. You can purchase one of my 11 published books. You can join my meditation course, and I will see you in the next video.